committed to reading and discussing 99 pages every week to improve our worldview and public discourse. This month, the Educator Book Club is talking about this book, Teaching When the World is on Fire. We as educators are committed to lifelong learning and Socratic dialogue. If you support this mission, as Dan Kelly says, smash that subscribe button. I'll be your host. My name is Amy Coney Barrett. Jackie Newman. And tonight we're talking about section 2, which will touch on issues of racism in schools, as well as gender and sex ed. So this is the second of 3 sessions. We're excited to see you for our final session on this book next week. And I also wanted to give you an early heads up that next month, we'll be talking about teacher coaching, and we'll be tackling Elena Aguilar's Onward about emotional resilience in educators. And I feel like no matter what way the presidential election goes next month, we are all going to need some emotional resilience to get through the rest of 2020. So if you want to check this out from your library now, we're inviting you to join us in November. But let's go ahead and get started. We're going to reintroduce our incredible panelists from last week who are joining us. I've asked each of them, because they're all doing some kind of teaching on Zoom right now, to share an icebreaker that they like to lead with their students over Zoom. So first up, we have a former high school English teacher turned literacy coach and teacher coach, my friend in Baltimore, Kendra Gray.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the wonderful introduction, Jackie. So my team, we actually met today, and I facilitate our ELA and literacy team members meeting every week. And one of the icebreakers that I gave today, which was really impactful, if I must say so myself, was create your own leadership team. And when I moved the slide to the next slide, there were about 15 pictures of different celebrities, ranging from Jeff Bezos to the wonderful Kamala Harris to Lil Baby, The Baby, and Dee Watkins, a famous Baltimorean. And so our team members had to create their leadership team based off of the pictures of the celebrities. And they loved it. It created a lot of conversation. It was amazing. I give myself 10 out of 10 for it.
Thank you, Kendra. That's going to be tough to go after, but we'll go with our 17-year educator and 8th grade math teacher, Dan Kelly. Welcome, Dan.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thanks again. So good. So excited to be here for this. So excited to listen to everyone's thoughts. So excited to look in the chat and see what people are saying over there and try to be interactive and respond to it. So one of my favorite ways to kick off and get a little icebreaker going is that so many of our kids are active gamers these days, playing everything from Among Us, which is like a strategy game, to classics like Tetris, to all sorts of Roblox, which I learned about last week. So I just throw a question out in the chat or on mic and have people talk about some recent gaming, the wonderful victory they experienced and maneuvered to create, or devastating loss, and it drives the conversation forward. And we actually start talking a little about game theory and strategy. So excited for our conversation tonight.
I also learned a lot about Roblox last week and had to study it afterwards. Also in Baltimore, next up, we have early childhood educator and school leader, Zachary Sherbini.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here with you tonight. This is a year of sabbatical for me, so unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to work as directly with teachers and students as I would like to. I really do miss that portion, but I recently had a chance to do a diversity, equity, and inclusion workshop for a group of preschool teachers. So we talked a whole lot about race, where it comes from, how it shows up in society, and one of the icebreaker questions, because it can be such a tough topic for a lot of folks to talk about, is when was the first time that you were aware of race? And it just made an otherwise difficult topic accessible, and I really believe in starting with baby steps when people feel nervous. So that one seemed to be a good hit and got people pretty comfortable for the topic.
Thank you, Zachary. I'm actually curious, when was the first time you were aware of race?
6 years old at a summer camp, when someone asked me about my background and I didn't know what they meant at all.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Next up, we have Laurel Staub, education leader, learning experience designer. That means we're going to expect a lot of your Zoom icebreaker, Laurel.
Oh man, no, mine was very low key, but really excited to be here again tonight with all of you to discuss this excellent book. And my icebreaker is just a really quick, easy, fun name game specifically for Zoom when you're in the gallery view where everyone is in those little Brady Bunch boxes, where you do a quick name game where someone goes and they say the name of the next person who goes, so they choose who goes next, and then everybody has to point in Zoom to the direction that they see that person on their screen, and it's pretty fun to see people struggle with the mirrors and things like that. But it goes quickly. It's good to teach each other's names, and a fun kind of energizer to get started.
I still struggle with the mirroring. I did a stretch before this, which the panelists saw, to get us hyped up. And then my hair was messy and I had no idea how to fix it. So figuring it out.
You really get the hand-eye coordination going. Yeah, it's great.
And last but not least, we have middle school educator and former teacher of the year. Sorry to embarrass you and shout that out every time, Michael Black.
Well, thank you for having me back. My icebreaker, two things really. I have the students in advance of the class, they can request the song to be played. Because the first couple minutes, there's people coming in and they're in the waiting room or whatever. So we're always listening to a student-selected song. And then at the end of the song, we do an attitude of gratitude. So I'll thank them for being my students and thank them for being there. And then I'll unmute everybody's mic and I'll say, thank you for being my teacher, which is a little bit corny, but they're in middle school, so it's okay.
One thing I learned from Kendra last week, always be cheesy. No, get cheesy. Right, Kendra?
Yeah.
Cheesy.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Again, I created this book club just as an excuse to interview my favorite educators about their philosophy and practice. So let's dive into the book. One thing just to start us off, I wanted to share one of my favorite quotes. For those who have the book, it's on page 92 in Christopher Emdin's essay. And he says, quote, acknowledging that education isn't about a completed body of knowledge and that the teacher does not have all the answers expands student perceptions about the nature of learning. And I just want to say, I love saying that right up front. We don't have all the answers. We just need to embody growth mindset and that we are lifelong learners, which is why we're here asking each other these questions. So as I ask and we discuss tough issues around racism in schools and other forms of oppression, let's just all acknowledge that we don't have all the answers and we're just all one day at a time getting better at having these tough conversations. So with that, the first essay was by an author named Jamila Pitts, and it was called Don't Say Nothing. And in it, she advises, quote, begin by confronting your own biases about yourself, your students, your fellow educators, the world. And I'm curious, for anyone on the panel, what biases have you uncovered in your teaching or leadership? And Kendra, I think you told me a story about this. I'd love to start off with you.
Yeah, so when I was, a fresh off the block teacher way back in 2009, I entered the world where my students are living and are from with understanding that I was coming in to, of course, do phenomenal work as a teacher for them. And I had a couple biases that I had to uncover. One, namely, that I was doing a service for my students. There's a big difference between doing a service and getting paid. And I also was collecting a paycheck, which definitely meant that the level of service that I thought I was doing, I definitely had to back it up with some evidence and actually question and confront for myself, what does it look like to be a present educator in the school that isn't just saying, oh yeah, I teach, brown and black kids in a lower socioeconomic area, but actually really meaning and showing up and, dedicating myself to that. And then the second bias that I definitely had to uncover was the fact that not having present parents meant that the parents did not care about their student. And honestly, it's very easy to believe that because I wasn't the only person who also in my head thought that because my parents weren't showing up or because they didn't answer the phone when I called them or because they didn't come to an event that might have happened at 4:30 on a Wednesday when they're probably working as well, that they didn't care about their students. And so through a lot of confrontation of what I thought it looked like to be a dedicated and present parent, and also through confronting the fact that like the system at work does not help our parents, especially parents who have to overextend themselves to be a part of, our thriving economy or our capitalistic society. That those parents, they actually were also, striving to be a part of their child's life, even if they weren't necessarily there. So conversations, definitely listening and not always thinking that I knew it all. Asking myself the question, like, why do I believe this? And, how did I create this understanding?
Amazing. Anybody else want to add about
I wanted to add to that because that was the bias that I was going to talk about also was this, and not anti-parent, but just not thinking that the parent would be an ally in the whole endeavor, just thinking like, well, the door is closed and it's me and the kids and, I can't rely on anybody but that relationship. And, I certainly have had my share of negative parent interactions. So, it's like a once bitten, twice shy kind of situation. But I can't allow, a few suboptimal experiences with people to prevent me from bringing people into the classroom and making it a team effort, so to speak. And so it took me a long time, longer than I'd like to admit, to find ways to really engage parents, make them feel welcome into the classroom. Because I think, by the time they get to middle school, they've already had their own suboptimal experiences with teachers. And so that bridge needs to be rebuilt. And that's our job to do. And it took me a long time to figure that out.
The editor of this book, Lisa Delpit, was most famous for, as Marianne Panarelli pointed out in the chat, a book called Other People's Children. And I think that's just such a beautiful way of thinking about teaching. You are lucky to spend so much time with other people's children. And there is an essay in this section actually about family engagement. And so since we've started by talking about relationships with families, I'm curious, does anybody have effective strategies for family engagement?
I do. So I think one of the neat things in this book they talk about is exactly that idea, that, and what Michael, you were just saying about welcoming people into the classroom, if not literally and physically, then at least sort of mentally and sort of awareness of what's going on in the classroom. And I think that, for all sorts of reasons, this cyclical system of having people who are not feeling super welcome or not feeling successful in the school, pardon me, then when they grow up, that's when they think of school, they think of any number of negative things. And instead, if we can work hard to sort of break down that barrier and try to make it welcoming again, that's super important. So one thing that I do is, so many schools operate around a system where, basically kids get a report card. So every 10 weeks, the parent essentially gets like a letter, like, hey, that 10 weeks, that, 5 hours times 10, that's 50 hours that your kid spent with me and working at home, they get a B. Like that's just so far like below what we could achieve. And so one thing I do is I have this, it's called the SMPR, the Self-Maintained Progress Report, SMPR. And it's on a bright blue piece of paper that I print out. And it's just like a logbook of all the reports, all the comments, all the grades that a kid gets. And they fill it out. It's their responsibility. Every Monday we update it. And then they have the whole week to get it signed by a parent. So that idea is that every week the parents are hearing, how is my kid doing? What are they up to? What's going on? If there's a positive comment I can put on it so the parent can sign off on it. That all of a sudden just breaks down that gap. It makes it a little bit more, piece by piece. And it's got my email, it's got my phone number right on it. So if parents have questions about anything, tie that in with a self-advocate form the kids or the parents can fill out if there's any concern about anything. And then all of a sudden the barriers are broken and there's quotes on the SMPR saying like, we're in this together and I'm here to support not just your child, but you, and we can figure this out. So, when we work together, we'll achieve good things. And then all of a sudden there's not this like 5 or 10 week gap, just punctuated by a letter, it's a constant feedback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Something that I experienced in my first year teaching and then brought to the subsequent schools that I worked at was what we called a hopes and dreams conference. And again, keep in mind that I work with early childhood and taught in elementary schools. But essentially, a Hopes and Dreams conference is a chance for families to sit down with the teacher. It's optional, but many families take advantage of it. To sit down with the teacher at the very beginning of the year, before the school year has really even started, or over those first few days of school. So you can imagine that it's time and energy intensive up front for faculty. But in my experience, like pound for pound, it is the most valuable family engagement tool that I've ever seen. You sit down with the family, and they have the questions beforehand, so they can take a look at it, think about it, and it's essentially what are your hopes and dreams for your child this year? What was their experience like in school last year? Who are some of their friends? What are some of their fears? So what you do is you set yourself up as a listener from the get-go. And so many families are blown away by this experience that, for many, their experience with schools can be, as parents can be, teachers calling to make calling home to make that disciplinary phone call, or the parent-teacher conference, which is just loaded with a lot of anxiety and emotions, honestly, from both sides. And I think relevant to the topic of family engagement, I wanted to loop in this concept that Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who is she just retired. She's an educator at the Harvard Grad School of Education. She wrote a book called The Essential Conversation about parent-teacher conferences. And she mentions this concept called ghosts of the classroom, where essentially all people, teachers and families, are bringing these ghosts or hurtful memories, hurtful associations with school to those conferences, and it's like a theater where all these things like play out. And so want to acknowledge these things, know that they exist for everyone, but then be understanding when they do come out, and they do occasionally come out, particularly for non-white families, where schools historically not only aren't necessarily the most hospitable places, but in some cases we're actively denying opportunity. So having that notion in the back of their mind, that when you meet, there are some things. It can be a loaded situation, and something as simple as bringing in adult-sized chairs when you're in an elementary classroom can keep an adult, can keep that parent from feeling, oh my goodness, I'm a kid again. My kid's teacher is about to tell me how terrible they are. That means I'm a terrible parent, and minds can really be spinning there. So just opening up that conversation from the get-go, setting yourself up as a listener, letting them know that you are there for their kid and that you are interested in their kid can go a long way the whole year.
Zachariah, why does this have to be just for young kids? I feel like I should do the Hopes and Dreams conference in my marriage, in my friendship. You should do it as a panel. Like, everybody needs the Hopes and Dreams conference. I love it.
I wrote that down. I'm doing that.
I also want to shout out. Oh, get in there, Kendra.
No, I was just going to say, I commend my colleagues. These are some great innovative ideas, but good old-fashioned phone still works. There are a lot of teachers who need to hear and be affirmed in that your phone calls and text messages still can get the job done in terms of quality engagement. One of the things I am pushing my teachers on currently is just making sure that when you do have a parent on the other end, that you are being strategic in what you are asking and what you're hearing from them, what you want to hear from them. One of the things that Kreiner Brown talks about in the essay is making sure that you're actually talking about the learning experience and not just, these like lighthearted comments. Oh, your child's so great, they're amazing, or your child's not doing well, they're not showing responsibility. But what does it actually mean to have, a high impact score on this standardized exam for your child for next year? Or how can the parent actually support at home with the resources that they might have in their kitchen cabinet, for example? So, these ideas are wonderful. I love the creativity, but I also want to plug that the phone just still works. If you just pick up the phone, that's the first step to making sure that you can have quality engagement with parents and families, not just parents, because that's another issue too. A lot of times we forget that every child doesn't have someone they identify as a traditional parent, that they could have a family member that really cares about them, that they live with. And so being inclusive in those titles also is really helpful.
Thank you for shouting that out. One of our writers in here, Alison Brown, she works for Teaching for Change in DC. She talks about phone calls as a powerful family engagement strategy. But I was also struck, and if you're in the book, it's on page 121, she realized later, quote, I had weaponized my communications with their families as a classroom management strategy. And what she means is she realized she was using it as a carrot, like I'm gonna make 3 calls home today if you're good, or she was gonna use it as sometimes a punishment of course, call home to say that the kid had a bad day. I was really struck by that word, weaponized. I'm curious if anyone else had a reaction to that, or similar at any moment where they realized that something they did might have weaponized what otherwise could be a positive connection or positive reward.
Weaponized is an interesting word, right? Because a weapon can be used as a weapon, or it can also be used as a deterrent, right? So I'm fond of thinking this little Benjamin Franklin quote, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so the way I read that quote was she's saying I can use this as a way to establish a relationship and prevent a lot of the negative things that may come later with her students. So.
Right. No, I think that, but I think she was still challenging even that mindset that you're in, that it's kind of like you're using carrots still or sticks, even as preventative. It's not really thinking about the holistic experience that you want to have to build with the families and with community. Right. And one thing that struck me that she also talked about was that it's very much that it's much more about creating a collaborative community with the school, and oftentimes we put this all on teachers, where teachers have to make the phone calls, teachers have to be responsible for this and a billion other things, right? So I think that actually, if we push it up to the leadership level of the school, it actually becomes really important. How do we as a school create a community and a place where we have these positive relationships with parents, and not just leave it to individual teachers to be the ones managing this?
Mm-hmm. Incredibly powerful. Zachary, I'm just going to throw that one to you as a school leader. How at the school level do you build positive relationships with families as well as the community around the school?
I think when I made the transition to school leadership, that's when I was starkly aware of systems and the kinds of systems that are in place. And some of them are supportive and some of them are prohibitive. Some of them are intentional and some of them are not, but systems exist nonetheless. The practice of these hopes and dreams conferences was something that I had brought really intentionally to each of these to each of my last 2 schools. I also realized that that data speaks to people, and so I was really intentional that if I was going to bring in a new initiative. I learned from not doing this initially, but if I was going to do a new initiative, it's really in the best interest to collect some data, ideally have some numbers around it if it's something that can be made numeric, and share that out so that the success isn't just private or just known from the leadership level, but that you're actually communicating with your faculty the result of all of their energy too, because at the end of the day, I can make a decision as a school leader, but it is faculty who are implementing it. And I think not only giving voice to faculty in those kinds of decisions, but also giving them that follow-up so that they can know at a more systemic level where their efforts are going collectively is really helpful. So I think just at that leadership level, if you are going to start a new initiative, one, be mindful of bandwidth and what else is going on. Even a good idea, poorly implemented, I think is a bad idea. So making sure that you have the bandwidth as a faculty to make it successful, but then also define success, create some guideposts, remind people of what they've been doing. Sometimes I think a mistake that I've made or a mistake that I've seen in schools that I've been a part of is schools make a one-time decision and then rarely follow up on it, and faculty will think back and say, "Well, whatever happened to that thing? Are we, is it working? Are we still doing it?" I'd like to know the effects of it. So communication.
Yeah. Totally. New initiative fatigue is real, and I love that you talked about including teacher voice in decision making. Teachers feel unheard of, and it leads to a lot of burnout. Laurel, jump in.
Oh, I just wanted to add on what Zachary was saying with the systems thing. There's actually a quote on page 122 from this that I loved, where she's actually quoting someone else, I forget who, Teaching for Change, she says, but it says, too often systems, not people, are responsible for creating and maintaining the disconnect between families and schools. And unfortunately, too often people, not systems, are blamed. And I found this to be really insightful, not just applicable to schools or even education, but the world in a lot of ways. But I think it's very true, right, that oftentimes we might have this mentality where we end up blaming individuals, whether it is like the teachers who are playing into the system or the families, you know, who have their own kind of things that are playing into it. And in the chat was mentioned that even families can have their own kind of baggage about their own educational experiences. And family members can do that they're coming to and bringing to the interactions with school. So a lot of us have trauma about our school experiences as well, right? So it's a systemic thing, and understanding it as such, and understanding that we want to solve it at a systemic level as well, and not fault individuals.
Thank you for shouting out the people in the live chat. We've had lots of great ideas thrown out there from Jessica Berg in Loudoun County talking about positive postcards. Thank you for that. Judy Bello, again, I think I said this last week. She sounds like she'd be an amazing mom. And schools can use their websites, newsletters, parent-teacher student association meetings. I love it all. Dan, I want to come back to one small thing you said. You said you share your cell phone number, right, in these SMPRs. And I'm curious, especially because the subject is teaching when the world is on fire. There's a lot of teacher burnout right now. The job is really hard. How, in giving out your number so freely, which of course increases communication, which of course you want, how do you set boundaries communication-wise with adults?
Great question. So right on that SMPR are also essentially my office hours, right? So it's like very literally like you can call me if I don't respond, I will get your message. I try to call back within 24 hours. Email is usually faster. And yeah, so they can't. You know, it's actually fun because when I had that conversation during parent-teacher night or in the classroom with the students. You know, it's that joking moment where we're like, hey, kids, you know, and I teach 13 and 14-year-olds. So I'll be like, so how old are you guys? You guys are like 7, right? And they're like, no. And I was like, I know. But you guys go to sleep, what, like around 8 p.m., you know? And they're like, what? No. But then like you joke, and then you're like, okay, but seriously, like I have 2 little ones in my home. So like after 9 o'clock, it's quiet time in this house. So if you want to text, if you want to call, before 9 o'clock, and it happens when it happens with humor like that, and when it's like it's fine. And honestly, I tried having kids text me before, and it was great, but I also felt like text is, I think part of the implication of a text is that it's immediate, right? So when kids text me, I start a timer in my own heart and mind, like, okay, it's been 1 minute, I haven't gotten back to them. So eventually I did say that texting is a one-way thing. They can text me if they want me to know something right away, quick, great, but I'm not going to text them back. I will email them back as soon as I can. And that also, I think, sets up that professional boundaries, and also the professionalism that like learning to email is its own sort of thing, right? And I don't know that it's fair to like superimpose sort of like corporate culture on students. I do know that that's not fair, but I also think that giving them the tools to sort of succeed, in the way things are is helpful. So yeah, it's a great, we talk about boundaries, talk about connectivity, and it's a lot of fun.
Right.
Piggybacking on that real quick, I just it's also an opportunity to teach just like good manners, because sometimes students will try to contact you or text you at different times, and they can have like a demanding tone with what they want to do, and it's just like, cool, thank you for telling me that you had this problem. Let me help you say it in a more polite way. So I just wanted to add that in there.
I love it. A lovely redirect. Great. Let's go back. The first section of the book is about racism, and the first essay, Jamila Pitts, "Don't Say Nothing." She really talks about how can we as educators break the silence about systemic racism, and in particular police brutality against Black and Brown youth, men, women. I like that she shares specific examples for literature teachers, for history teachers, even for science teachers. She shares you can have students research how science was used to justify the myths that promoted Black inferiority. For example, research around the Tuskegee experiments or about Henrietta Lacks in Baltimore. So I'm just curious, for any of you, what tools do you use in your classroom to address and discuss systemic racism?
Sure, I can take that one. So I am lucky that I actually get to teach about education, and which is one of my passions. And then I teach both undergraduates and then I teach faculty at my university. And one of the things that we definitely always cover when thinking about racism is the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy and stereotype bias, and thinking about how our impacts as educators and the biases that we were talking about before, those actually can play out in our teachers. So self-fulfilling prophecy is not just the students themselves having an idea of what they can do and that limiting them, but the same goes for teachers, right? That if teachers have this self-fulfilling prophecy about how students can perform, that will actually shape how they perform. And there's actually research, education research that backs that up. So I get to do that quite a bit. But I also work and teach in Kigali, Rwanda, or that's where I usually am. And so I have students from across the continent of Africa, from about 30 different countries, and faculty from across the continent of Africa as well. So really quickly, I realized that myself as a white American coming in, that I had a lot of learning to do to be able to even broach these topics. So I had, my own background and where I was coming from. But that was another thing that I realized I had to start, was I needed to understand pre-colonial colonialism, neocolonialism on the continent, and understand the experience of my students and my faculty in order to be able to engage. So I think that's another important thing we can do as educators is really to continuously learn for ourselves and to keep learning and to read like this book club encourages us to do, right? And I'm going to shout out right now, and thinking about police brutality, the police brutality is not something that just happens in the US, and oftentimes we do get a very narrow focus on just what's happening in the US, and that's important. But right now there's an entire movement in Nigeria that is affecting a lot of my students, the NSARS movement. So there's a special unit, the Special Anti-Robbery Squad unit among the Nigerian police that is very guilty of police brutality. So it's something that's also shaping as well. So it's just encouraging educators to learn about their own kind of things that they may be going through, and even maybe become a part of those movements or help them to understand what's driving them as well.
Laurel, one thing you said last week that really moved me was how you talked about classroom management and how it can often impose white middle-class norms as the benchmark for success. And one of the essays in this book by Christopher Emdin, Black Teachers, Black Youth, and Reality Pedagogy, talks a lot about this. And he lays out his 7 C's for what he calls reality pedagogy: co-generative dialogues, co-teaching, cosmopolitanism, context, content, competition, and curation. Woo! I'm just curious, for those in the audience who haven't read this book, if any of you want to talk about any of those 7 C's, have you used them in your classroom? Dan Kelly, I'm pointing the right way.
Yeah, nailed it. Although you said cosmopolitanism way easier than I just did. Yeah, so I'm on page 91, and here's a direct quote on that. So it's developing the ethos in the classroom. That's a responsibility that teachers of Black students should take seriously. So students must feel that they have roles in the classroom that allow them to be responsible for each other and that allow others to recognize that they have value in the classroom. And I felt my heart was warmed when Michael read that part and said that he thought of me, because he certainly observed my classroom a ton. And yeah, absolutely, what's important to move away from is this idea that there's a teacher as a focal point in the classroom, and then all the desks are facing the teacher, and all the kids are seated and silent and sitting up and listening to the teacher talk for 48 minutes or however long. That's terrible. So you want to get the kids involved, you want to get them moving, you want to have them feel like they have a role in the classroom beyond sitting and receiving. And so, yeah, in my classroom, we have a ton of jobs. I think last year was up to 12 different jobs in the classroom. And these are jobs that students apply for. They apply for them. But that said, I actively make sure that kids feel comfortable applying for them, that there's an interest value. And sometimes I incentivize it with some amount of extra credit. And then I sort of reduce that over the course of the marking periods to emphasize that it shouldn't be about the extra credit. It should be about, do you feel like you play an active role in this class? Do you feel valued in this class? Because you should. And you should feel like other people value your role in this class too. So just off the top of my head, you've got like the people who check the homework, the people who put the homework, input it into the computer spreadsheet. You've got the people who hand the homework back to the kids so they can complete it. You've got the captain, the first officer, and the second officer overseeing all these jobs. You've got the mailbox monitor. You've got the attendance person. You've got the cold call person with an iPad generating who's going to get called on next. Also decentralizing it, right? So it's not me, calling on any individual student. I'll just ask a question. What's the square root of 49? I'll give a little bit of wait time, and then I'll snap my fingers. And at that point, the person who's got the iPad will call on the next name. And so therefore, like, everyone feels like they're involved. They're like in it. And the more we can bring that to every classroom, the more that the kids can feel like they're taking an active role in making everyone else's experiences better, which, by the way, they are, the more that our kids are going to be excited to come to class, and like their attendance will be higher and their involvement will be higher. And it's wonderful to see. And honestly, one of the things that's with remote learning that's really hard is I don't really know where those jobs are yet. I'm working on it, right? I'm just growth mindset. Like, I'm trying to figure it out. But that remains a challenge.
I have something I wanted to add, and I have a question for my colleague, Dan. So this section reminds me of a time when one of my favorite pictures of me teaching my ninth graders was where I'm standing in like the foreground of my student at the overhead projector. Yes, the overhead projector, 2009. And he has a writer, and he's proceeding to teach his peers about, I think it was like a rote grammar lesson or something like that. But it reminds me of my attempt at co-teaching. And the one part that I missed that I feel like is probably most integral in the co-teaching model is like, me and the student, we never like connected after the experience to see what went well, or what needed to be improved and what strategy I should push to the next time I teach the next group of students I teach that lesson to, which I think is really powerful in putting the onus back on the student, and having agency about the strategy that they're using for their peers, and challenging the adult in the room, the person who seemed to be the person that has the most responsibility with using that strategy and actually utilizing it and getting the feedback from the other students. But my question for Dan is, how do you keep the roles that you have equitable for students? Because I can imagine that there's like a hidden hierarchy in some of those roles. I wonder if students, gun for certain positions over others, and what your role is as the facilitator of all this and making sure that everyone gets a chance to be some of these like higher order jobs.
That's awesome. You've like immediately cut through like so much of what I said to the like essence of like what's so important about it, right? Because if you have those jobs, but you just sort of like, give the kids that like are already on the track to like, the kids already doing all their homework, already like getting 100 in the class, already doing all these things, and you make them captain of the class. Well, okay, I'm sure they can handle that responsibility, but how much are they then actually learning from that? How much are they earning, and how much is that actually improving their lives and the students' lives? It's really cool because I don't have a perfect answer to this. Like Jackie started this off with, like we're still all learning. But one of the things that happens early on is that I'll have the jobs are all jobs they apply for. But then I also like actively I'll pull some kids aside early on and be like, I would love for you to apply for this job because I see how responsible you are at this, that, or like hype up one big moment that they did well, like even if they're otherwise not necessarily having a tremendous start to the year, and try to get them involved that way, right? So I'm definitely like putting my finger on the scales a little bit, like, hey, I'd love for you to get involved. And then there is like a component too where they can't have a job if their homework return rate is not high enough, or if they're not, meeting the other metrics of being an involved student. And then what happens is the very same kid who like, maybe I'm hearing that they're not succeeding in another classroom, ta-da, like now that they feel like they have value to this classroom, like you start to see that I don't even need to remind them to do the things that they're doing or to get involved because like they're there. They're already excited about it. In fact, it's actually gotten to the point where for sometimes I'll have a kid who's coming in and like they've got little sniffles, which is like more important than ever these days, obviously. But like back when it was probably just a cold 5 years ago, you know, I would tell kids like, oh, I'm so sorry, you're not feeling so well. Like, you want to stay home? And they're like, I couldn't. You know, who's going to do my homework job? It's like, okay, hold on. I love the dedication, love it, love it, love it. But take care of yourself. Like, that's why we have the captains, the first officer. You'll be okay.
Like, interrupt the system and look at you. You're doubling down on it. They have to fight you in.
Yeah, and so Kendra, you make a great point, and I don't know that I have a great answer to that, but it's something that's really important to think about, right? You don't want to just reinforce the hierarchy there. You want to shake it up, and you want to give opportunity to everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Zachary, I want to pull you in. I know we had talked about the Christopher Emdin essay. I'm curious, did any of those 7 C's resonate with you in your practice?
The cosmopolitanism, got it right. I was having trouble with that earlier. To me, but another one that jumped out at me was curation, which is basically with your students having this intentional selection of artifacts that reflect your learning journey together. And the first time that I was really intentional about that, I would say it was actually my last year in the classroom. So it's a shame it came along so late, but this was when I was teaching pre-K. And I remember reading a book as I was preparing for that year. We started to do project work, and we used the project approach philosophy by Lillian Katz and Sylvia Chard. And there was an anecdote in that book about an early childhood classroom. And at the beginning of the year, a family comes in and sees that the walls are bare. And, you know, early childhood classrooms have that reputation for being like bright and shiny and pretty posters and, you know, like snappy sayings up on the wall. And in this anecdote, the teacher's response when the family asked about this was really simple. She said, we haven't begun the year, so how could this classroom reflect the learning when there hasn't been any learning yet? Like, we will create this together. And I thought that was really, really powerful. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with the posters and the snappy sayings and all that, but I wanted to give it a whirl in terms of allowing kids to have greater ownership of the classroom. And would they, in fact, I wondered, would they, in fact, see it as more of their classroom if they were part of that process of curation. And so one of the big projects that we did that year was on restaurants. And it was, again, this is like 4 and 5 years old, or 5-year-olds. And one of the really nice things about picking a broad topic like that is that everyone feels like they're an expert. Every kid in the classroom feels like they have some experience with it, can bring something to the table. And the project itself lasted about 3 months. And so it was really slow and intentional. Some of the work was done within the classroom. We sometimes had guest speakers come in. We would do field work and visit actual restaurants. We would go to the kitchen at the school and just build our conception together and build vocabulary. And one of the things that we did was keep a giant web, like a drawn web where any different kinds of concepts or vocabulary, we would sort of make lines that came off and then just keep listing things. And we would set aside some intentional opportunities throughout the week where, all right, we're gonna take this back out, we're gonna put it on the board. You know, we just had this speaker or we just read this book. What else can we add? So some of it would come really intentionally like that. Other times, though, we would have kids like right in the middle of work time, you know, so they would be in the Block Center or in the Dramatic Play Center or the Art Center. And I'd be walking around doing a little bit of monitoring, and a kid would just stop me and they would say, Mr. Sherbini, I have another kind of food. I'd be like, great, what do you have? And they're like, pizza. And we definitely had pizza mentioned 6 times before, but I was like, so awesome, thank you for your idea, and add another check mark. And for those kids that maybe either they're not going to feel comfortable enough talking in front of the class, or they were out to lunch in that particular lesson. The idea behind curation and building the learning together is that they can get to it when they're ready, and they can see something over the course of the day that inspires them, and they're like, now I'm ready to add. So curation was something that I really appreciated, that jumped out at me.
I love that idea of co-creation. And one of the examples of the 7 C's was co-teaching. I'm curious, does anybody have good examples of giving more power to students? Yes, Laurel.
Yes, all about co-teaching. So I have had the opportunity, since I teach education, I often make my students, I say make, that sounds very coercive, but I like to have my students lead warm-up activities, right? So get them to kind of plan in groups what they want to do for the warm-up. and I've really oftentimes been blown away by the things that they are able to come up with. They're really able to come up with, experiential activities or things that really connect to the topic that we're going to be teaching, and things that I never thought I never would have thought about my own, right? So I patted myself on the back. I was like, oh, wow, I'm so good at this, giving up that autonomy and letting the students lead and things for this 15-minute segment in the beginning of the session, right? And then I got to observe another one of my faculty members who her entire course, she designed it such that groups of students would teach the topic of the week, and she would design she would curate resources ahead of time that they could choose from, and they would get together in a group and tell her what they wanted to be able to teach, which resources they should send up beforehand, and then they just would design these incredible lessons on different topics. The course was about introduction to global challenges, so it was across the board. They're doing governance, education, environmental advocacy, lots of different topics. And I got to observe one of these classes that the students were teaching, and the level of engagement and excitement of the other students being taught by their teachers was tremendous, right? It was one of the best classes I've ever observed, and it was our students who were teaching, right? And I was like, wow, we really showed up, and I got showed up because I was like, okay, I'm not patting myself on the back anymore. What I was doing was not really actually giving up the power the way this faculty member was able to do, and yeah, I was just blown away. So you might think, so my takeaway from this though is you might think oh, I'm the one who does kind of know it, even though yes, we all are learning from each other, but I'm the expert here, aren't I? But if you give students the opportunity, they will impress you time and time again, is what I found.
I love that.
Can I jump in too as well? Yeah, thank you. Here I am, this guy. Laurel, that's great. That's another example, I think, of being in this with all of you, and my mind being blown. Today, I learned that I shouldn't be patting myself on the back also, because I do exactly that. I'll get to a point in the year where I'll have kids lead the warm up, right? And that's something that almost no other teachers that I've ever had the chance to observe have done. Although I'm sure a ton of teachers do it, and it's lovely. But yeah, I'm feeling great. I'm sitting in the back of the room, or I'm walking around helping kids out. I'm feeling cool, this is great. I'm they're the center, I'm in the back, and I'm get to freedom to do other things to be supportive too. And then when the cold call generator comes and it lands on the teacher, the kid who's in the front of the room actually teaching, then I'm the kid, and I get to respond for them. It's the one time that they have to call me Dan at that point, because I'm a student, I'm a student. But Laurel, your point's great, right? Why stop there? Let's go past that, and let's have the kids take leadership and learn. I don't need to reiterate everything you're saying. That's an awesome idea. Thank you for pushing me to the next level.
I want to shout out
having them design. Students are great designers.
Yeah, the code generative part, that's what caught my eye, because I was I've been skipping the code generative step. I say, hey, here's a marker, I want you to lead the class, but it's always a surprise to the kid. What am I doing? I should be planning this with them more in advance and coaching them a little bit more.
I was really moved by the essay, Believe Me the First Time by Dale Weiss, where he talks about co-designing a unit on gender with two students who are non-gender conforming. I thought that was really, really beautiful. There's another essay in here by Natalie Labossiere in Oregon. It's called Who Do I Belong to? A Black Teacher's Dilemma. She talks about how hard it is to be one of few Black teachers in a white-dominated school. And it encouraged me to Google. I was like, actually, what percentage of public school teachers are Black? And I was shocked that it's only 7%. And so I'm just curious, why do we have a shortage of Black educators in today's public schools?
I will take that one. Well, one of the things that everybody's laughing, but no, I want to say that first, the numbers are startling, and I want the number to definitely increase, but it doesn't reflect the amount of Black teachers who want to become educators. There are many barriers that prohibit Black educators from being certified teachers, namely in Baltimore City last school year, I believe, the Black Teacher Recruitment and Retention Working Group, where they researched this very topic because they realized that, students definitely benefit more and learn more from people who look like them. And with Baltimore City having such an overwhelming amount of students of color, Black students and brown students, really wanting to recruit strongly Black and brown teachers. And so some of those findings were, mind-blowing to believe that, first of all, in order to be able to pass a standardized test or several standardized tests that weren't necessarily created to you as of color be able to get certified and be in the front of students. Then the second hurdle to the test is to be able to pay for the tests. Those tests can add up, especially if you don't pass them right away. You people who have set for the praxis exam, not once, not twice, but up to 5 or 6 times, which, who has money to be able to dish out $150 time to take these tests to be able to be certified. So there's so many barriers that prohibit teachers of color, specifically Black teachers, to be able to be certified in front of their students. It also should beg the question to ask, what does it mean to truly be a certified teacher? What is this mystical piece of paper that we hold that other people who don't have, we feel like they couldn't legally or shouldn't be able to be in front of students, or that they're not as esteemed or influential. And I really encourage everyone, check out the Black Teacher Retention Working Group. They have great, if you Google Baltimore City with Black Teacher Retention Working Group, you will get the whole report. And it has some really, eye-opening, amazing details about how we can get more Black teachers in front of Black students. And yeah, stop here, because I can go on, this is my topic. I can go on forever.
I want to hear more.
I do
Go ahead.
want to add one last thing, because a lot of times too, people think that alternative certification programs are the way. Newsflash, alternative certification programs do have fees associated with them as well. The majority of them, the ones that I'm familiar with in Maryland, are not 100% free. They might offer certain things like, a certain number of money off for your certification or your tuition, but ultimately they all require some money to either get started in, move to the area, and things of that nature. That's it. Sorry.
No apologies. I think you brought up a really beautiful point, is that the thing that we test teachers for almost is like totally, it has nothing to do with teaching almost. It's like basic content that, and none of the things that really, really matter and get through to children. And that's such a beautiful point. I feel like we should have a whole meeting just about that. And then I worry also about like the script that we give children when they're young. I mean, I always ask middle school kids, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because I'm trying to figure out what motivates them. And, sometimes they'll say doctor, lawyer, vet, and all those sort of things. And I always ask them why. And it's always because they want money. Money is always the answer. And it's so disheartening. Like, you want to be a doctor because you want money? You can save people's lives. And the teaching thing never comes up unless they have a family member who's already a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's this self-perpetuating cycle where if you're in a family that doesn't have a teacher, you're not being told that this is a script or something that you should aspire to in the first place. And so and the idea that, everyone knows teachers aren't paid enough. And the idea is if you're motivated by money instead of doing some kind of great good or altruistic thing, then it won't even, I fear that it won't even occur to a lot of kids that this is something I should pursue. And so, I don't know, it breaks my heart to think that that's not an aspiration so much.
Two things to jump off of what you just said, Michael. One, oh, sorry, am I talking over? No, Kendra, go ahead. I'm sorry, you were on lag. Go ahead.
Go ahead, I'll wait.
I will jump in.
I just want to say, nope, I'm muting myself.
Explain. No. I wanted to say that I used to tell my coaches that I just started coaching, especially ones who are like being introduced into teaching. Like, teaching is the quote unquote section, right? So like, in comparison to their peers who might be working at like Deloitte or Google or, these really fancy and amazing experiences that look really good on social media, let me just say. Teaching doesn't always look that way. And I was blessed to have a family of educators, namely my grandfather, who was like an amazing elementary educator, Black male educator in the 70s. And so I was that person, Mike, to your point. Money definitely will add teachers into the classroom too. Being able to feel like you are getting properly compensated to be able to live appropriately in society, definitely would also be one of the things that systems are able to do for teachers. Sorry, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Dan.
No problem. Yeah. So, okay. First, you stole all my points. But that's awesome. Good. And I think one thing I want to be careful of, and Michael, I know you well enough to know that when you have those conversations about money with the students, that's something that you're sensitive about, because as much as we want to reject the notion that that money is the end all be all of everything, right? We also want to be sensitive to the fact that so many of our kids don't have enough money to live a life that's comfortable. So we want to be careful in rejecting the pursuit of money, that we're not also rejecting the needs that they have that aren't filled. And so and again, I know that you know that, but I just want to raise that point so our listeners and people in the feed can know that that's part of your thought process too. And then the other thing is that I think part of the reason why some people don't grow up thinking, oh, I want to be a teacher too, is because when they look around and when they go to school or when they're doing remote learning right now, so many teachers are teaching when the world's on fire and letting the burdens get to us in a way that is justified and is hard. But think about it, if you're a student and you grow up and all of your teachers are overworked and underpaid and exhausted and trying to reinvent the wheel, and you see a lack of joy in their eyes when they're teaching because of all of those constraints, who would want to grow up to be somebody who is joyless, right? And so some of the nicest comments I've ever gotten in the yearbooks that I have my kids sign at the end of the year is Mr. Kelly, I know what I want to do with my life now. I want to be a teacher, because if I can do something that makes me as happy as you are every day, that's the life I want. And that means that I've conveyed to them, not that teaching is easy, not that it's the solution, but that it's a source of happiness when you feel like you're doing it right.
Amazing. My heart grew 2 sizes, the opposite of the French during that last part. I know we're rounding up on time, so I think the last big question I want to throw actually to the parents / family members in the group. Thank you, Kendra, for pointing out that parents is not always the best term. There was an essay called "To My Son's Future Teacher," and I'm curious that the section we read this week, it had some tough stuff: sexual harassment, gender identity issues, racism. There's a lot of oppressive things happening in schools and, of course, in the broader world. The world is literally on fire in California and other places. So I'm just curious, for those of you who've had the joys of becoming a parent or an aunt or an uncle, has that changed or evolved your views on teaching and education?
A lot. A ton. Especially, I was reading this part. I wanted to copy and paste this letter and just kind of have it ready for when when my kid is old enough. I'm the parent of a unisex child, so there's going to be a whole lot of navigating gender identity, as she currently identifies female, but we'll see as she goes, and it's going to be a journey. And I know that a lot of teachers are going to be sensitive to that. I also know a lot of teachers are not. I teach with teachers who, when they see a boy with long hair, call them girly, or, and I know that that's going to be a hurdle to pass. So my heart went out to that parent. I know she also spoke specifically about, racial issues, and the quote that I'm paying a lot of attention to. I'm going to misquote it, but you're working to prevent incarceration, or you're part of causing incarceration to happen. Mm-hmm. And it's so much of our youth is, we talked about scripts a little bit ago, there's growing into this identity that they get very early. And, the teachers need to be brought into that conversation early also, and it can't be ignored. Just can't be ignored.
Yep. One thing I might also add to that is a direct pull up from the book from page 167, and something that has already impacted my teaching year this year is there's a whole essay that is titled "Nothing About Us Without Us is For Us." And as we think about how every kid, every student we teach is someone else's child, And I think about that quote. That quote literally is on the first Google slide I showed to my students this year from remote learning, because one of the first things they did was they made a Google slide which they populated with things that make them who they are. You know, all the whatever they want to put up there, I gave them some guidelines. But yeah, I want my students, I want my little girls, when they grow up, I want them to feel like the teacher wants to know who they are as people, as citizens, as students. Because, you know, if it can't be for them if it doesn't include their voice. It can't. And so I think that's true for all students, for all classes, for all teachers. Nothing about us without us is for us.
I think we're gonna have to end there. I know we got more to add. Luckily, we get one more session next week. It'll be our last finale discussion on this book. Please, as Dan said, if you believe in what we're doing, smash that subscribe button. That is the way to support us. And also, again, a heads up next month, if you want to check it out from the library, we're going to be reading Onward about teacher coaching and emotional resilience. But thank you to our incredible panelists. Thank you to everyone in the live chat for joining the conversation and supporting us. We'll see you this time next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.